All right. Well, welcome everybody to Hydroplate Theory's week of celebration. We are so excited to honor Walt Brown and also to offer the ninth edition to everybody, which is hopefully in print by now, and it should be able to be gotten for Christmas. And we are just excited to have Fred Williams with us today. I know he's had played a big part in my growth as a creationist with Real Science Radio. He's been doing that for almost 20 years, and he's a creation speaker and software engineer, and he's back from assignment. So thank you so much for making time for us, Fred.
Oh, yeah, great to be here, Brian. Thank you. Thank you for putting all this together.
Oh man, I'm like a kid in a candy shop, just talking to all
Yeah.
these Hydroplate guys. And I was talking, the Real Science Radio. I mean, thank you so much for keeping that going after Bob went to heaven. It's such a tremendous blessing. I just love how you and Doug McBurney do that. And if people want to hear that, how would they do that? Or if they wanted to support that, how would they do that?
Well, you can support us by going to rsr.org, and we have a store there. You can subscribe you can subscribe to our channel on YouTube, go to the store, you can become a sponsor of a show. And we have to actually pay them for the airtime, but we're glad to be on the radio. We're now on at 12:30 p.m., right in the noon hour, which is a really good time slot on Friday, every Friday.
Oh,
And
praise the Lord.
yeah, KLTT reaches 5 states. It's the most powerful station in Denver.
Yeah, and that's one of
So
the things where when I'm doing these creation talks and I want to learn about a topic, I go into rsr.org, and then there's typically a scientist who's being interviewed, and I get all the details, and it's a great way. But let's see, how did you, hear about the hydroplate? It's been, I heard Walt Brown's interview. What was that? Walt Brown Week on RSR, and that just colored in all the details. How was it for you on your journey?
Well, years ago when I first got into creation science, one of the early books that I came across was Walt Brown's In the Beginning. This one right here, this huge, big book that's just fantastic. And so the hydroplate theory didn't really come to me right away. And if you look at this book, it's huge. But the early chapters of this book cover all things related to creation, evidence against evolution. And that's where I found it the best resource initially. So a lot of people forget that about Walt Brown's work and everything he did. They just think hydroplate theory, but he also had very coherent and solid arguments against evolution and for creation, and very well documented in a very concise and easy to use manner. He would make the salient highlight points, and then you could always check his references and go to his reference section if you wanted more details. And so that's how I first became familiar with Walt Brown. And this was, at the time, it was my favorite creation book. And this is before I even cared about the hydroplate theory. Because at the time, I was pretty new into creation. And I'd say it was probably 5 years after getting involved that I started even thinking much about the hydroplate theory.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that too at the very beginning, because I think that's how it started. He'd give these seminars, and he would show the errors in evolution and how that can't happen and the Big Bang, and then he'd go into his hydroplate theory, and that was his seminar, and then he just started, and still people could keep up with everything instead of writing it all down. He had these. That's what's the instigation to the book. It just get growing and growing and growing, and hopefully the ninth edition will be out with their radioactivity chapter soon. That's going to be exciting. And I just love how you and Bob would do your, all scientists work for Walt Brown stories. Just phenomenal. And did you have much correspondence with Walt while he was still here?
Not a lot, but there was a little bit of correspondence. I never met Walt in person. The last 15 years that I did Real Science Radio with Bob, and now that he's in heaven, and the last 3 was really kind of the tail end for the most part of Walt's career. And Bob had done plenty of interacting with him, but I think as I got more involved with Real Science Radio, we were kind of already past the point of a lot of direct interactions with Walt. So, but I will say this, when Bob passed, he sent a really, really nice, him and his wife sent a really, really nice card to us. And I thought that was really cool. And, handwritten card. It was just, it was an honor to be able to present Walt's work. I've met his son Rob. And I think Brian, I don't know if you were out here when Rob gave his talk, but we met at dinner, and Rob, just fantastic guy. I think he has 11 kids. I mean, what an honor that is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to be a father and also, have the career that he's having right now at the Air Force Academy. Um, it's a testimony to Walt, the way his, kids are. And, I look forward to meeting Walt someday in heaven,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
we'll both maybe get to see a video of the actual flood. I don't
Oh
know if we'll
yeah. 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 I'm really
find
looking.
out, what really happened. And, we think Walt Brown has by far is the closest, has the best explanation for the global flood.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. With his accurate predictions, and even you mentioned his son, Dr. Rob Brown, who teaches at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He's been got some of his work published in peer-reviewed journals with the trans-Neptune objects, and he's basically says they came from the inner solar system in the recent past, which that's what the hydroplate says, and he can
Yeah, they were
explain all the.
hydroplate articles. Yeah, they were hydroplate articles that made secular peer-reviewed magazines. So when anybody says, "Hey, where's the peer-reviewed work for the hydroplate theory?" It's the only flood model that actually has peer-reviewed work in secular journals.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And because they can't explain why Niku's orbiting backwards and all these other things, they're all puzzled, but it all makes sense with the hydroplate theory. And we were so blessed to have him give a talk at the 2023 Hydroplate Conference. And people can hear his talk if they go into hydroplate.org, or else they're also on YouTube and Rumble to search the Hydroplate Conference or the Hydroplate Theory. So and there was 3 PhDs that spoke at that conference. So there's well-educated people who think it has a lot of merit, and a lot of them are engineers, like you're an engineer, software engineer. It's like the engineers love this, like
Mhm.
Brian Nickel and Matt Wellborn, and it just goes on and on. So when you were looking at this, what kind of makes you think the hydroplate theory is the one that's accurate? What do you think the best evidence is for that?
Best evidence? Well, that's a good question. I like how Walt started with the Bible, which is the right approach. And the hydroplate theory is the only one really that matches the Bible as it does. In fact, his book has a section of what matches scripture, and he compares the different flood models, and his just checks most of the boxes, if not all of them. So I like that aspect the most. But, looking at the scientific evidence, I think the one that stands out the most to me, and there's a lot. I mean, first of all, you got the crack that goes around the globe, right? The mid-oceanic ridge, which would be a really good place for the fountains of the Great Deep to have burst forth and to create that crack. Because what created that crack? If you're a Christian, you have to, if you trust the Bible, then there's a global flood. And even if you're not a Christian, that there's this crack around the globe. Well, what caused that crack? And what was the result of that crack? And, Walt Brown came up with all kinds of ingenious ideas. And one of them was all this material that got shot up into space. And so then when you look at everything in space and see that it confirms a lot of Walt Brown's predictions, for example, we see the near side of the moon is much more pockmarked than the backside. And that could be explained by just a ton of material hitting it, and some of it escaping gravity and some of it landing on the far side. But not only that, I just love that, NASA reported that they found an Earth rock on the moon that came from 20 miles beneath the Earth's surface in a watery environment. So like we like to say, well, all scientists work for Walt Brown, because Alan Shepard, it's not like he won the Earth rock lottery. If he stepped on a rock and it was from the Earth from 20 miles beneath the surface, at least the characteristics of the rock suggested that there's a lot more Earth rocks up there. It's not like he stepped on just the one. It somehow escaped Earth's velocity. Um, and then I think we all loved Bennu, the asteroid Bennu,
Oh
that
yeah.
Astra Alexandria played that. She's a secular YouTuber, and she does these shorts, these 1 minute video clips, and she did one on Bennu. And it's so funny because she shows that the rocks, some of the materials they found on Bennu, one of them was serpentinite. And guess where they find serpentinite? Pretty much in only one place, for the most part on Earth, and that's at the mid-oceanic ridge.
Right.
And she's pointing at that crack. And then she says, well, Bennu must have come from a watery planet. And it's like Kevin Lee likes to say, called Earth. Let's call that planet Earth.
Right,
So
right.
I could go on and on, as you know, because I know you've given great talks on the hydroplate theory. That's just, I'm kind of skimming the surface, but I guess if I had to say which ones are my favorite evidences, that would be the what we find in space,
Oh yeah,
and
and I remember
crack around the globe.
seeing that Astro Alexandra video for the first time when you were
Oh yeah,
interviewing me for something, the errors in the
yeah.
textbooks. Yeah, and you wanted to show it, and it didn't work. It's like, well, just plug it in later. And but you said no, you wanted to get our expressions, and Doug McBurney's expressions are just, just they're so hilarious because his mouth is dropping, his facial expressions. I bet he'd be a terrible poker player, but it was hilarious. And then when it was done, Doug says, we've just witnessed a victim of the public school education system. They won't even consider that that was Earth. And yet, Walt Brown's theory, you talk about the moon rock being that's what, 20 kilometers below the surface. But in the textbooks, it says that the Earth's oldest rock was found near Hudson Bay in 2008. And
Hmm.
in 2019, NASA said that they found it on the moon. And so it was on the moon, and I pointed out to the school district, and they didn't change it. So a lot of what's in the books is not accurate. And I love that, that Bennu. And that's the thing for me. It's like the accurate predictions. That a theory that makes accurate predictions is probably on the right trail. And I asked a CPT expert, catastrophic plate tectonics expert, what predictions, have they made that were accurate, and what current predictions do they have? And they said that they don't make predictions. And I asked him, and you mentioned the Bible, how Walt starts with the Bible. And I asked him, what verses in the Bible distinguish the catastrophic plate tectonics model from the other models. And he said, well, I just asked him what verses in the Bible support it. And he said Genesis 6 to 8 or whatever. And that doesn't distinguish it, where Walt Brown has, several verses that point to the water being inside the earth. And then you can see another list of that at rsr.org/HPT. I believe there's a chart in there where there's probably 12 or 13, solid verses that point to the hydroplate. And I just think of Dr. Walt Brown as the Isaac Newton of our day. And it's such a blessing that he has left all this work. I mean, this is the proofreading copy of the ninth edition, 300 some pages, and the ninth edition is going to be 600. Is this 600? Whatever. But it's a great gift for people that, want to see what it was like before that. And my concern is that it dies on the vine. We don't get it into the next generation. And wouldn't that be a tragedy to have all these answers and accurate predictions, and it just fades into history? So, and, Real Science Radio is doing their part to, to keep this in the mainstream or get it in the mainstream. But what do you think that other people, how can we help this get a foothold in the scientific community?
Well, that's a good question. And I guess one of the thoughts that came to mind while you were mentioning this is, and this gets back to Walt Brown, Dr. Walt Brown, and just how gracious he was, is we had a production meeting, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and it also done a homeschool conference. And people come up to our table, and we just don't have any material to give them on the hydroplate theory. We've got, we may have a couple copies of these books, but it's just not something that someone's at a conference is just going to grab a big, thick book like this. So one of the projects that we have at Real Science Radio that we're going to, we're going to start here really soon, actually, and that's coming up with a 30 to 90 page little pamphlet or small booklet, because people like those. They'll take those at those homeschool conferences, and we want it to be like just, everything on the hydroplate theory. And of course, something that's 30 to 90 pages is only going to scratch the surface, but it'll introduce more people to the whole idea of the hydroplate theory. Bob used to say that, the grassroots movement of creation is where the hydroplate theory is really thriving. And I'm paraphrasing, what Bob had said about that. And, and then major creation groups, the institutionalized creationism, I guess, is, I think, kind of what Doug referred to it as. They're buying into a different, the catastrophic plate tectonics. So what can we do? That's a great question. I think getting more information out, these homeschool conferences, because let me get back to what I said about Bob and the grassroots movement. I didn't see that when I was at other conferences, and I was really surprised. So, for example, I went to the CMI conference, Creation Ministries International. They had one in South Carolina, I think about 4 years ago. And I'd say maybe 10% knew about the hydroplate theory. And the of the 10% who knew, they were mostly the institution, the people who were kind of the big name creation, the creation speakers knew of it. And they kind of, one of them poo-pooed it. It's like, oh, does Bob still, Bob really held to that hydroplate theory. So we need to get it, not just, we need to find more scientists to push it, promote it, move forward with it, but we also need to make more headway into the grassroots movements. And I know you're doing that, Brian, with all the talks you're giving. But again, I was surprised with a lot of people getting material from the major creation organizations, the people I met at that conference, they didn't know about the hydroplate theory.
Right.
And many of them were very interested.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. People love this. And I think there should be a race to see which museum gets the hydroplate theory in there first. Let people see both sides. That's what education is. You have two theories and people can sharpen their analytical skills and compare and contrast and think independently. And that's, I think whichever museum puts the hydroplate in there first and allows it to be compared, I think they're going to lead us out of the dark ages. Because right now the hydroplate theory will destroy the Big Bang. I had mentioned, I think it was to you, that I was planning on going to the St. Louis Creation Conference this year where all the scientists were going to be, creation scientists. And I think it was you that said, don't waste your time. Their minds are made up. Go to the homeschoolers. And so then I went to, the one in Minnesota and the one in Iowa, and I had a sign on my table that said, will the hydroplate theory destroy the Big Bang? And everybody comes up, what's the hydroplate theory? And it takes probably 15 minutes to explain it properly. And so I almost lost my voice. I almost couldn't speak at the church the next day. But there's a lot of interest. When I talk to college students at campus, there's a lot of interest because it makes so many things. It explains so many things. And I like your idea of the book. And I wish somebody would just do just a quick overview and then do one on the Grand Canyon too. Because I think the Grand Canyon is a big weak point for geologists. I was supposed to debate somebody on it, and they got cold feet. And now there's another guy that wants to, but we'll see if he steps up to the microphone. Because there's no way that little river cut that big canyon. And so we just break down these icons of evolution one at a time. And I think little books, even children books, the children's books, they just have a little hydroplate theory overview, and then also one on Grand Canyon and maybe one on comets and accurate predictions, just a little series of them. And I've been talking to Becca homeschool curriculum to try and see if they can put it in their homeschool curriculum, because right now we're being forced to think of a secular model sped up. And I like how you describe that, and I'm listening to, when I'm going to all these places and I'm listening to you and Bob and Doug, and it's just a great time to learn stuff. And you said it's just a secular model sped up. We should use a biblical model. And I think you're right. Pointing to the Bible is the best evidence.
Well, plate tectonics is an old earth paradigm. I've had some creationists say that's not true, but it is. I mean, that's why the secular crowd loves it, because they love anything that they think goes against Genesis, and anything that's millions of years or takes eons of time to do fits their paradigm. And so I don't know how anyone can deny that plate tectonics as a theory is an old earth paradigm. It just is. And we've done a lot of damage to that theory, I believe, with Real Science Radio and a lot of our friends. Ellis Hughes' book, 25 Reasons to Question Plate Tectonics. Looks like you have it right there.
Yeah. And you gave a talk on this at the 2023 Hydroplate Conference. You gave a talk on plate tectonics problems where you highlighted.
I wasn't an expert, but I was asked to present, the material in the book, and I was honored to do so.
Well, here's another one too. Tectonic Globalone by Christian Smoot. This guy mapped the ocean floors, and he says plate tectonics doesn't work. It's and so I think we need to get that into the mainstream too.
Yeah, he was a guy who believed in plate tectonics until he actually saw what and he knew what plate tectonics claimed would be, what the surface, underneath the ocean should look like, and none of it was true.
Right.
And so now he's a virulent opponent to plate tectonics.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and he
he's an
doesn't talk to
ally.
the professors because their minds are all made up. He talks to
Yeah.
the students
Yeah.
because they're still open-minded. They haven't been,
Yeah.
they don't have any skin in the game yet, you know.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Pete Moore was telling us when he did the show with us on special relativity that, they had a conference in Houston and they had a geophysicist come in and review that book, The 25 Reasons to Question Plate Tectonics. And I didn't see the talk, but apparently this guy's like, they make a lot of good arguments.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Pete, he's a great guy. He flew me down to Houston to give the hydroplate. Him and I gave the hydroplate perspective, and then
Oh, great.
Nathan,
Yeah.
somebody did the CPT thing, and then we were going to have a roundtable discussion, but then a hurricane messed that up. So,
Yeah. Oh,
but
I
yeah,
didn't
I
know
think
that.
that's what
Wow.
we need. Maybe on Real Science Radio, maybe you can get some of these CPT guys to, get on and have a roundtable discussion with, hydroplate guys. The strengths and weaknesses of each theory should be critiqued, publicly or privately, however, but they need to be critiqued. But it's almost like it's above criticism. They treat
Yeah.
hydroplate people like evolutionists treat creationists. It's like, well, you're just not qualified. And I gave, the eighth edition last year, I gave it to a professor at St. Cloud State University, and she had it, she had it returned. She contacted me in 2 days and said, well, Bob's not a geologist. It's like, well, Darwin wasn't a biologist, and you're still using his stuff. So yeah, it's just they instead of
Well,
looking at the argument and looking at the accurate predictions and looking at how it explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system, they're just biased against them. And I think that attitude is really holding science back. I think this theory
yeah,
will
it
destroy the
really
Big
is.
Bang if it gets into the mainstream, and we have creationists that are keeping that from happening. So just pray.
It's
Another thing to get into the mainstream is when you go to the museums, when you hear these creationists talk, start asking about the hydroplate. I did that one time, and they said it doesn't work, and I asked, well, why not? This was during Q&A at a creationist place speaker, and he said breaks laws of physics, and I said, what laws of physics? And he said, I don't know, but the geologists that he knows don't go along with the hydroplate. And so that's, a couple of geologists who may not understand it very well are poisoning the well for everybody. So just keep asking about it, and hopefully they'll start looking into it more. And then we'll destroy this Big Bang eventually.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on, I guess, probably a sensitive topic, and that's, in my opinion, that we're too top heavy in the creation movement with geologists. Now, it's great to have geologists, but their particular point of view is ruling the day, and engineering, when the engineering for things don't work, it's just not being listened to. We've talked about it before. Me as an engineer and someone who's worked I was a team lead for the modeling group at Micron Corporation, and the number one argument for catastrophic plate tectonics through the years has always been the modeling. And I
Right.
know as an engineer, the models that the model is the whole saying that you know all models are wrong, some are useful.
Right.
That really rings true with this one. And there, to me, the probability that the model is accurate is almost zero.
And you
It
gave a
can't,
talk at the 2023 Hydroplate
yeah,
Conference, Geophysics Modeling. So if people want to see the limits to modeling, that's a really good talk to look at. That'd be at hydroplate.org or else on YouTube and Rumble also. Excellent
yeah.
talk though.
But yeah, and so too many people put too much stock in something that is so unlikely to be true, and they're not looking at the engineering aspects, and that includes even the mechanical engineering. The Brian Nichols shows where physics-wise these things aren't possible. And geologists, I don't know if it's they don't have the mathematical background, but a lot of the big name, there's a lot of geologists in creation science in creation science, in the institutionalized creation science, and just not enough engineers. Walt Brown was an engineer. He has a PhD in mechanical engineering, West
Oh
Point
yeah.
graduate.
Oh yeah.
MIT. His work was his thesis was on heat transfer, so he
Right.
knows a lot about the heat problem. But not only that, Dr. Brown ran a team of engineers. He was the team lead of, I believe it was 40 PhD scientist engineers. Now, you don't typically in my career, you don't get into a position like that if you're not highly respected and very
Oh
competent.
yeah.
Typically, now there's always exceptions, but to me, that's a testimony to Walt and the respect he had among his peers as someone who was very competent and good at what he did. And yet he's just a voice that we kind of know the backstory and this the spiritual warfare that went on with
Right.
Walt being split from the major creation groups, and it all goes back to the canopy theory. Walt was the first one to say, "Hey, the canopy theory is wrong. It doesn't work with physics," and it got him in hot water with the creation movement. And it took, I don't know what it was. I'm probably off on my dates, but at least 10 years before the creation movement came around to realizing Walt was right
Right.
about the canopy theory.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
How long will they take to come around for the hydroplate theory?
Yeah, yeah. Which creation organization is going to lead us out of this dark age? Well, whoever does it, it's going to be a big feather in their hat as people look back on history, and they'll say Walt's not a geologist. Well, he took geology classes from Bob Dietz at Arizona State, and this is the guy. Bob Dietz. He coined the term seafloor spreading, and every Wednesday they would talk. They would talk about things. And so he's got a really good geology background from one of the experts in plate tectonics. And one time he asked him, "Hey, where did all this limestone come from?" Because limestone releases carbon dioxide, and there's 60,000 times more limestone than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And Bob Dietz says, beats the blank out of me. So there's some unanswered questions that can be answered with the hydroplate theory. And it's, such a blessing. And when he tested to get into MIT's doctorate program, he was in the 99th percentile. So this guy is about as sharp as they come. And it's a tragedy that his ideas are being kicked to the curb for whatever reason. And so hopefully people start getting more information and start asking more questions, and people be a little more open-minded on this topic, especially since it's got biblical support and, accurate predictions.
And I wanted to just add to that same point you're talking about. Geology is more of an abstract. You have to guess more. I'm sorry, but you do. And I know one creation scientist is fairly prominent, gives talks, and he objected to Walt Brown's theory just because he said Walt said something wrong about some geologic formation. And it's like, so you're going to throw the entire theory out just because of some thing he may have said wrong, and I don't know exactly what it was. It had to do with some issue with the geologic formation. But when I was preparing for that modeling talk, it was interesting. I came across a joke, and it was from a geophysicist professor, and apparently it runs in their circles, and it's this. If you ask an engineer what's 1 + 1, he'll say 2.00000. If you ask a geologist what 1 + 1 is, they'll say somewhere between 1 and 3. And if you ask a geophysicist what 1 + 1 is, he'll whisper in your ear, "Tell me which answer you want me to tell you."
No kidding.
That was from a geophysicist. And so we are putting way too much stock in a field of science, and I say science loosely,
Yep.
that has a lot of speculation, a lot of guesswork, and yet it dominates the institutionalized creation organizations. We had Rod Steidler on a little while ago, and he has these, he's a Harvard MIT scientist, Rob Stadler.
Yep.
And, we had him on Real Science Radio, and he gave criteria for how if you have high confidence or low confidence in some theory. And catastrophic plate tectonics would be equivalent to evolution if you go through all of his criteria. It would, and yet that's the theory that's pushed.
It's testable, it's repeatable. You'd eliminate bias, And I remember Bob Enyart, he was talking to a geologist on a trip one time, and he asked him, "Do you give blind tests when you make these dates? Do you do blind tests?" "Oh no, we're professionals. We don't do that." And that's how they should do it. I remember when he wanted Jack Horner to carbon date that dinosaur bone, and they wanted to test 5 things blindly, and let's see what you get. And Jack Horner won't do it. But I want to be respectful of your time, Fred. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule, especially from getting back on assignment. It's been a busy month for you. And do you have any closing comments for the HPT fans out there?
Well, like you said, Dr. Walt Brown was our modern day Isaac Newton. I'm not sure people just realize, the the great mind that we lost, but his work will live on, and we'll continue to, work to promote his theory. We believe it makes the most sense. And when people hear it, they're just like, yeah, this does make a lot of sense. It fits a lot of the evidence. I mean, why we have, leap seconds and leap year? Why don't we have a perfect 360-day year?
Yeah.
The hydroplate theory explains all of that. It explains, like you said, the radioactivity. He's the only creationist that actually had an explanation for why we have radioactivity, something that's harmful that wouldn't be part of the fall. I mean, would have been, the result of the fall. Before the fall, where did radioactivity come from? So many questions are answered that you wouldn't think of, that the hydroplate theory answers. It's really cool. And I want to thank you again, Brian, for all the work you're doing. You present the topic really well. And
Well, I can't
this
have
God
done it
bless you.
without Real Science Radio. So we encourage people. I think the best ones out there, realsciencersr.org, listen to that. There is a museum that does have the hydroplate theory. It's in Broken Bow, Nebraska. It's called Boneyards. So there is one museum that has it out there. But
Good for them.
Thank you so much, Fred, for your time.
And thank you, Brian, for all that you're doing. It's awesome work, and looking forward to the next Hydroplate conference.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'll be exciting. Yeah, that'll be exciting. Well, may God bless your efforts, and hopefully our paths cross in the future. All right. Well, that was great. And I encourage people to, if you have any questions, if you want to put them in the chat comments or the comments under YouTube or Facebook, we'll try to answer them. We're going to have Harold Gilbert coming up in just a couple of minutes. And then at 5 minutes after the hour, we're going to have Pastor Kevin Lee, who is going to talk about why the hydroplate theory is not widely accepted and why it's been censored, kicked to the curb for all these decades. So there's a story behind the story, and I think this is where you'd really want to get that one. And so again, if you could, this is a grassroots organization. We're trying to get this into the next generation. Otherwise, all Walt's work is just going to die on the vine, and we don't want that. And so if you could do us a favor and share this, share a link, share it on your social media, because if we don't do it, the secular scientists certainly aren't going to do it. And even the creation scientists don't do it. So this, again, is a grassroots movement, and we need everybody to do something. So if you could share this, that would be greatly appreciated. And we will just give you a quick teaser of what's coming tomorrow night.
To teach a Sunday school class on creation versus evolution topics. So a man answered the phone, and I said, I'm sorry. I thought this was Sunday afternoon. I thought I would just get a message and let my phone number. Turned out it was Dr. Brown.
Really?
And he talked with me for at least half hour, 45 minutes, answered some of these basic questions, even though he didn't know me from Adam, didn't know anything. I had not read his book. I had just received it. He answered some very important questions that I had. So I presented those to the Sunday school class the next time, and it all worked out real well. Well, that Sunday school class ended, and I never really thought much about it until the church asked me literally the next year, would I do it again? And the class had grown to over 200 people that first time. I called Dr. Brown and said, look, we want to have a live Q&A with you. And so what we did is I had everybody for several weeks write down their hardest questions on 3x5 cards. On that particular Sunday, Walt Brown literally called into our church. I could read the questions to him. He could answer on the phone, and everybody in the audience could hear it.
Wow.
And that was phenomenal that he was willing to do that. And he answered so many hard questions that people had back then. That was my introduction to the hydroplate theory, directly from the guy who founded it. But I didn't know anything about it at that time. I didn't know much more than the theory just seemed to make sense.
Well, hey, welcome everybody to the Hydroplate Theory Week of Celebration, where we are honoring Dr. Walt Brown and the Hydroplate Theory, which is making accurate predictions and is being validated by NASA discoveries. And we are so excited to have a rocket scientist tonight. This is Harold Gilbert. He's got his master's degree from Auburn, and he's taking a bunch of time with us tonight. And so thank you so much for being with us, Harold. And just how did you find out about the hydroplate theory? You probably didn't learn about it at Auburn now, did you?
About I don't know, about 5 to 10 years ago, I had a renewed interest in the creation story. I mean, I've been a Christian since I was 7 years old, and um, and so I just started reading pretty much all the literature on it. Right, I went through the journal creation and went through all the different creation magazines and things like that, and just read. I was just had a hunger for it. And I remember in my youth, I would defend it, but back then, of course, it was the canopy theory that was the big thing back then. Um, so I started watching videos. I ran across Bob Enyart's.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Bob Enyart at Real Science Radio, man. Everybody's got to plug into that. That's so much fun to listen to when I'm traveling.
And that's where I first heard about the hydroplate theory is on his show. And so that sort of sparked an interest to me, and I just started looking. I saw some of Walt Brown's videos. I actually ran across his, he has online, he has the sort of um, a summary of his hydroplate theory, and I read it. And then, of course, I ran across Brian Nichols' videos as well. And I just love the way that Brian had organized the videos. Being an engineer, I could see how much detail he put in it, and that I think that really spoke to me as an engineer, and I can appreciate the hard work that took.
Yeah, Brian Nickel videos are just phenomenal, man. It's so well illustrated, so well thought out, and so well delivered, man. Everybody should be checking that out. Yeah, and it's the engineers that really love this theory. It's the geologists that kind of balk at it. And we've been just so blessed that Bob Enyart there was kind of the tip of the spear, helping people, getting people to understand this hydroplate theory. And so we've been quite blessed with that.
Yes, and he had a little button on there that was like, scientists or engineers that support HPT, and so I eventually clicked it, and then he got me in touch with Brian, or yeah, well, Brian then was somehow ended up emailing me, and so I started having a dialogue with him, and I was able to, go through some of the things that he's working through, and that was really good. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, Bob Enyart, he's made a tremendous, tremendous advancement in science, getting this into the mainstream. And as an engineer, what do you think the strongest case is for hydroplate theory? What's the best evidence?
Let me back up first. As a Christian, let me answer that question first. As a Christian, what really speaks to me is the way he defines the firmament. When I was in my youth, I remember reading through it, and at one time I thought I'm just going to simply go through it and read it. And when I came to that day two, when the firmament was made, the word firmament just seemed to shout that it was the foundation, right? It was a firm, a solid expanse. But of course, then if you continue reading, it's God called it heaven, and then in day four, the sun, moon, and stars are created in the firmament. So of course, that word firmament was in my bubbles back in the day. That's the word that was used, right? It was not the word expanse. The word expanse has really only been used that I know of in the last 20 or so years. So I like the way that he made it into a solid expanse. He can explain it as a solid expanse, and that just sort of, I think, fits really well when you try to interpret it. The one of the articles I read that was trying to explain the firmament in the journal Creation. They were trying to say it's all like a spatial expanse, right? The models that they had, and they even have problems trying to figure out exactly what it means. You know, is it the sky? Is it the whole vault of heaven? That sort of thing. But they never really looked at trying to explain it as a solid expanse. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. But I think that's the right thing.
Yeah, I'm still dealing with that firmament thing myself. You know, I think that with the hydroplate theory, I think the overall concept is solid. There might be a detail or two that's not quite right, but I think with the accurate predictions and the NASA discoveries, I think it's on the right track and it's a very robust theory. And it's a shame that it's been kicked to the curb for so long.
Yes. Now, as far as like physical evidence, I think the lithosphere is probably one of the best explanations about it. Now, the lithosphere, I had a hard problem figuring out exactly what that meant, but it's just a zone. It doesn't go very far deep into the earth. It's basically the sort of the crust and also includes some of the upper mantle. And it's really interesting the way the lithosphere works. It looks like it's just the mechanical properties of it. It all looks like it's just one zone, but it actually is two different rock types. It includes the continental crust and then the upper mantle. And so their mechanical strengths should be different, but they're not. And so I think what has happened is that lithosphere has had heat applied to it, right? And that heat sort of expands it. And that's why you have the sort of the mechanical failures that you have. And hydroplate does a really good job of explaining, you know, that water as it heats up, it
Oh, yeah.
will.
Yeah, and that supercritical water and that heat and all that, it's just all these laws of physics that Walt Brown's been able to tie together. And it's just like having the exam before, you know, the answers for the exam. But with that lithosphere, you know, how deep does that go?
The lithosphere goes down, I think about 50 kilometers, 50 to 100 kilometers. You know, it varies
Okay.
over.
So that's above the crossover depth, the crossover density. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, it includes a part of the upper mantle as well. So that heat, you know, heat's going to transfer, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what the hydroplate theory has you know, initially has the water, the liquid water between the continental crust and the upper mantle. And so
Right.
once that starts heating up due to friction, it's going to that heat is going to transfer up into the continental crust and down into the upper mantle. And you can see, and once things start heating up, they expand, and you can see that that zone and includes just the mechanical failures of that zone that is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and so that crossover depth, for those who are listening who may not have heard that concept before, could you explain that a little more in detail?
Yes, crossover depth is so when you get past the lithosphere, there's actually so the bottom of the lithosphere would be where the crossover zone is, right? So
Okay.
beyond the lithosphere, you can actually have the crust. It can be in liquid form, I guess. Is that the best way to say it? So that's in the anosphere area, and so because it's a liquid, it's very compressed, and
Yep.
so the density of that liquid is greater than the local density of the solid. So it can't go up.
Right.
It can only go down.
One of
Once
the
it gets into the lithosphere, that's the pressure is not as great, so it's not as dense, and so then it can actually go up.
But right. So not all the way to the surface then, right?
Right, but well, it's still in a solid, so it
Yeah.
has to work its way.
And so that crossover density, that's one of the problems with seafloor spreading. You're saying that once that stuff gets to the bottom, you know, gets so deep, it's going to keep going down and it's not going to go back up.
Yes. The other area is I think is also in the what they're finding out in the asteroids and comets. You know, the obviously in hydroplate theory, it explains it as the asteroid and comets coming from the crust, the upper mantle, and also the crust as it goes up into the air. Um, and I don't know if you saw, there's an article yesterday from the Real Clear Science. that Japan had collected some samples from an asteroid back in 2008, and they've got those samples back, and they're looking at them. Well, their latest discussion in the article, it talked about that the asteroid at one time had running water in it.
Good.
So liquid water.
Yeah.
No, liquid water in space is
Well, yeah.
So how did they, they came to that conclusion. But so if that's true, then, hydroplate theory could explain that really well. I mean,
Well, yeah.
it was liquid water as it went up into the air. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it seems like whenever they find something in the universe, it validates the hydroplate theory. And I think the hydroplate will destroy the Big Bang when it gets into the mainstream. It's just been censored and kicked to the curb. Or, if you start supporting it, you might get blackballed, even in creation organizations, which is really a travesty, really. And that's not how it should be. And that's like when you signed, or even, the evolutionists for sure, and the Big Bangers, they aren't going to like the hydroplate theory, and you could lose your job. But when you signed that document on, or clicked on Real Science Radio, where you're a scientist that supports the hydroplate theory, was there any pushback from where you work?
Oh, no. No, I mean, I don't know if anybody really cares at work. I mean, what I do at work has nothing to do with creation or anything like
Right.
that.
Yeah, but if you were a geologist or biologist or astronomer and you had this hydroplate view, they might take another look at you and make things a little more difficult. I know Jerry Bergman, he's written 3 volumes on people who've been persecuted because they were creationists, or even if they just doubted the paradigm of evolution or the Big Bang, which is just a tragedy again.
Where I work, there's several people who believe in the creation. So it's been a very good to talk to them about the hydroplate theory and things like that.
Yeah, and what a blessing it is that Walt Brown did all that research, reading all those scientific journals and tying all those pieces together. I can't imagine all the tens of thousands of hours looking at this and studying it and then putting it into an understandable presentation with all his footnotes. It's technical, and yet it's easy enough for people to understand it and to go Walt Brown surfing from one topic to the other. This was a prototype of the 9th edition. It's got 300 pages. The 9th edition is going to have 600 pages with the radioactivity chapter. And he says, if this is wrong, we'll fix it. We'll correct it. That's no problem. He doesn't have his ego tied to this. It's his income doesn't depend on this. He says if it's wrong, and he never says the word prove. In science, you never prove anything. In math, you do, but not science, because you never have all the information. So yeah, it's a tremendous work that he's done, and we need to move this ball down the court or down the field scientifically. And so thank you, Dr. Brown.
That's good to know. I've never met Walt Brown, and that's one of disappointment, I guess. But I guess one day, hopefully, I get to talk to him up in heaven or somewhere like that. But yeah. So yesterday I was 2 days ago I was listening online. Just a guy named John Barnett. He talked about how us as Christians, we have a unique ability here on earth, and that unique ability is obviously to reveal who God is. And so I think Walt Brown, I think he did his job in revealing who God is, and I want to thank him for that, because that's been a really has really been inspirational to me.
Yeah, and what a blessing that Walt Brown made something for us. It's going to live on after him, and even Bob Enyart too. His shows live on after him, and what a tremendous blessing that is. I know something that really impacted my life was the Walt Brown Week on RSR. Going to rsr.org and search Walt Brown Week, and he was interviewed 5 days, and it just colored in all the details. And I've never seen the world the same since then, and into the solar system. So our goal is that we need to get this into the next generation, because if it doesn't get in there, this theory could die on the vine. So we need more people to get informed and inform others and pick up the torch and advance, shed the light in this dark world. And this is a powerful tool to do it. Walt's biography is in a book called Christian Men of Science, 11 Men Who Changed the World. and it's got some big hitters in there like Maxwell and I think Faraday and just some huge, huge guys. And then there's Walt. And I read that. It's an audio book. I put it on my YouTube channel. That's on Solidify Your Faith. And it's an hour and 40 minutes. And for some reason, Zoom didn't kick me off at 40 minutes. And Walt Brown, I think he's like today's Isaac Newton. And it's really a shame that I mean, that's what used to motivate me, that I wanted him to get the credit before he died, And then after NASA did this DART blunder, they ignored Kevin Lee's warning of what could happen if those are boulders instead of a rock. Then I was motivated to get this out there before NASA makes another another catastrophic blunder. And now I'm motivated to destroy the Big Bang. This theory will destroy the Big Bang once enough people know about it. So again, we just need people to pick up the ball and run as far as you can down the field and give it to somebody else and mentor people to do what you've done so we can make this big snowball that they're going to have a hard time stopping. A big avalanche of truth coming at people. And then trying to get people equipped and get it into the mainstream. Do you have any ideas on how we could do that?
Mainstream, I assume you're meaning into more into the young Earth creation mainstream. Is that?
Like, no. We're going after the big guys, the evolutionists and the big bangers. That's where I'm going. But I think you're right. The first domino that needs to fall is the creation organizations. And I think there should be a race amongst the museums to see which museum will allow us to think first. Because to think, you need to see all the information to make an informed decision. You need to see another perspective so you can think critically and compare and contrast. And what's happening in the evolution museums, the big bangers, it's just got the Big Bang and evolution. That's all you can think about. But in the creation museums, when they have a flood model, it's just catastrophic plate tectonics. That's the only one. And they should have another one so we can compare and contrast. So we'll see which creation museum is going to be the first one to do that, because I think that's going to be a big feather in their hat when future generations look back at this. So which one's going to lead us out of the dark ages? And I hope they race quickly and get this into their museums.
Yeah, like I think you're right. I think we need to get it into the young Earth, at least get it into their the way of thinking, right? I mean, as a possibility that it is a solid expanse, and that's what I would focus on is discussing how that can be interpreted. A possible interpretation of the expanse is that it's solid.
And there's verses you don't even have to interpret, the fountains of the great deep and the storehouses of water, and he laid the earth upon the seas. There's clearly water inside the earth. For that justifies the hydroplate theory. And I asked one of the catastrophic plate tectonic experts, what biblical verses support CPT? And he basically just said, Genesis 6 to whatever, which is just anybody's. That doesn't distinguish that from anybody else's. But the hydroplate has specific verses, about a dozen of them at least, in the Bible that point to water inside the earth. So that puts it above the other theories. Plus, it's making accurate predictions. I asked that same expert, what predictions has the CPT made and which ones are accurate? What ones do they have right now? And he basically said they don't make predictions. And so I think that we could save a lot of time and a lot of effort. Like if Walt Brown says, don't let anybody be published until they make an accurate prediction. That would save us a lot of time and a lot of money.
And his model also requires a miracle as well. Just setting it up in the initial conditions. I mean, how do you set that up? I mean, that's a very difficult thing to do, right. And that's not the way the plates look normally. And so it had to be some extraordinary conditions to make that happen.
Yeah, like what broke up the plates? How did subduction begin? There's a lot of unanswered questions there. A lot of miracles, really.
And once it gets started, I mean, it is more of a natural thing, but that's the problem. How do you get that initial condition without it starting, earlier?
Yeah, that's Fred McNabb's next video. He's got a good channel on YouTube. It's called Fred McNabb, and they're kind of like Brian Nichol videos for young people. And I think that's why he made them for his grandkids, so they could understand it. And it's very well animated, excellent graphics, especially his folded rock layers. I don't know where he got them, but those are amazing. But yeah, he talks about I don't know how many miracles he has for for catastrophic plate tectonics. I know Bob Enyart talks about him at the end of one of his talks. And then also Walt Brown. He's got a list of, I think, 6 or 7 miracles that have to take place for catastrophic plate tectonics to work. And I do a video on that called Problems with Plate Tectonics, I think it was. So I kind of condense all those to get it into a more refined version.
But to be honest, the geologies and stuff like that, geologists, they look at it from what we have now and try to, go into the past, right?
Yeah.
So I think as Christians, we have actually we have a little bit more insight, right? We not only can do that, take what conditions down and put it in the past, but we also know what the initial conditions are, right? So we can work at it both ways. While geologists only can do it in one direction. So I think that's a huge advantage. But of course, it's understanding what happened during Creation Week. That is the really the biggest issue, I think, for us.
Yes, what happened during Creation Week, what happened building up to the flood and during the flood, and even what's happening today. We're still recovering from the flood, with the ice age and the earthquakes. The earth is still recovering from that. And so it's exciting times we're living on.
So I think the problem with the young creation movement is they focus kind of on the asteroids and the heat problem and all that kind of stuff, and they can find problems and issues with it. But I think if we sort of take that initial step, in the scriptures that we can agree on, or that we can say it's possible, come up with evidence for that to be true.
And those decision tables that Walt Brown has at the end of every chapter, he's got the theories on top and he's got the features on the side, and Hydroplate's green all the way down, and everybody else is red and yellow with a couple of greens. So again, this is time that this theory gets analyzed, and it would be a great step forward to science if a creation museum would allow people to think about both theories instead of just presenting one as dogma. That's not science. That's just as bad as what the evolutionists do. We have a higher standard. Let's let all the information be out there so people can make informed decisions.
Has anybody ever tried to, to write an article like to the Journal of Creation about interpreting the expanse as a solid expanse? Or
yeah, I don't know if anybody's written on that. I know people have tried to submit hydroplate papers to the ICC, the International Creation Conference, and they were rejected because you got the plate tectonics people deciding who gets to speak. And so, but I think when people go to the museums, when people listen to these creation speakers, I think they should start talking about hydroplate, start asking about hydroplate. What do you think of the hydroplate? And they'll say it doesn't work. And then you could say, well, why doesn't it work? And this happened to me, personal experience. And the guy said, well, it breaks laws of physics. And I said, what laws of physics? He says, I don't know. But the geologists that he knows, the creation geologists, don't go along with the hydroplate. And so just keep bringing it up. But I know it's starting to change. That Dr. Randy Galuza, he invited some HPT people to speak at ICR because he wanted to hear about what the hydroplate people say, not what people say about the hydroplate people. There's a big difference there. And it's just a tremendous blessing to have people who want to follow the science wherever it goes, and they're not biased by their brand or by their organization or by the books that they're selling. They want science to advance. And I really have a lot of respect for people who do that. And I do not have any respect for people who oppose that. And so let's get the respectable people in charge. And hopefully this thing will, the dam breaks sooner than later, so more people can have their faith solidified and not end up in hell by rejecting the God of the Bible. Yeah, and the more we get this out in the mainstream, the bigger chip, we're just going to keep chipping on this dam, this censorship dam. We're going to keep chipping, and once it cracks, man, it's going to flood this culture and flood society with truth, and then we can go have a cultural revolution, an intellectual revolution, where we can think outside this intolerant dogma of materialism. All there is matter and energy, which is patently absurd. This isn't creation versus, this isn't science versus religion. This is blind chance versus creation. And so we need to start defining the terms that way. We need to start getting equipped, and we need to start pushing this ball down the field so science can advance and get us out of this dark ages. All right. Well, thank you so much, Harold. I do appreciate the time that you've taken here, and let you get on with it. Do you have any closing comments that you would like to leave us with?
No, I just appreciate, Walt Brown, and just thankful that he was, honored God, and actually, God allowed him to come up with his theory, and that it may take a little while, but I think eventually people will see the uniqueness about it, and they also will see how it can explain a lot of things in the Bible, as well as the physical.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank God for what Walt Brown did, and hopefully people see this. And I met a lot of people, they want things to get better. They pray for things to get better. That's our head and our heart. But we need more people to do something to get better. That's the hands and the feet. We need people to put their faith into action, because there's a lost and dying world out there, and they're putting their faith in the Big Bang and evolution because they don't have a theory that's making accurate predictions. And so I encourage heart in your hands, and thank you so much for your part in this battle.
Oh, thank you, Brian. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in here, and we are going to have the premiere talk of the week, I believe. Pastor Kevin Lee is going to talk about what happened to Walt Brown, and hopefully things can get rectified. And afterwards, Pastor Lee will be available for comments or for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chats or in the comments, and we'll hopefully get them then. And with that, let's enjoy Pastor Lee.